China, very interesting to see, of course, as by far the largest wind power market around the world. And I'm very pleased to have here with us Mr. Guiyong from the Chinese Wind Energy Association. And you will share with us information about how the current developments are in China. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for your introduction. And can you see my screen now?
Yes, if you just go to presentation mode, then I think it's also perfect.
Excellent. Yeah,
wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning and good evening, everyone. And I'm very pleased to join you here today. And since we are still on vacation for the national anniversary, so I'm back in my home and work today. And so I'll take about several minutes to give you a brief introduction about what's happening in China for the first half of this year and the impacts of COVID-19 and our maybe the next 5 years plan. So far we see in the last year, we saw a very stable increase for the annual installation. So the newest installed wind power capacity in China is 27.5 gigawatt, with a year-on-year increase rate of 30%. So by the end of last year, the cumulative installed wind power capacity was 237 gigawatt. And we have already finished our targets for the 13th five-year plan, with a year-on-year growth rate of more than 50%. And for this year, we see the new added capacity for the first half of 2020 by our status. So for the first half of this year, there's already 6.3 gigawatt has integrated into the grid. By integrated into the grid, I mean there is more than this number has installed. Maybe around 8 gigawatt has installed, but some part of them, a certain part of them are still testing and not yet integrated into the grid and put into operation. So among the 6.3 gigawatt, we have 1 gigawatt offshore wind. So we see this year the offshore wind is still increased very fast. So it is estimated about more than 30 gigawatt will be installed and integrated by the end of this year. As everybody knows, the feed-in tariff policy in China will come to the end by this year for onshore wind, and will come to the deadline for offshore wind by the end of next year. So just like the media or newspaper size, well, there's an installation rush in China. So everybody, every company want to install as much as possible just before the end of this policy. So it's much reasonable, and hopefully we can see much bigger annual installation capacity in this year and the next year. And also, we see actually just for the first quarter of this year, we have influenced by the COVID-19, but gradually with the much stable circumstance in China, by the strongly control of the government, we have back to the right track for since the second quarter of this year. So we see the construction is less influenced. But we still see there is some lag behind according to the original plan. But the industry have confidence to catch up with the original plan by the end of this year. So maybe we will match up the impact of the influence for the COVID-19. The lag behind will catch up. So offshore wind project construction is a little bit behind the schedule, and it's much less affected, comparatively speaking, with the onshore wind. So since there's one more year left to complete the task, according to the subsidy reduction policy, because the offshore project will come to the deadline for the feed-in tariff next year, at the end of next year. So hopefully we can make it with the joint efforts of the whole industry. And also our concern for Chinese wind power industry is that the global outbreak or the unstable situation so far may have impact on China market. So far we have not less influenced by COVID-19 according to other countries, or especially with the European or America. But we are just consuming our installation or our storages. So if the whole situation is not quite stable for the next 2 quarters of this year, well, for the next year, so there may be much more influence for China's imported components. So because the repertory of imported components will run out. So that's our major concern. The import and the export of raw materials such as basswood and PVC from Italy, and components like main bearings, gearbox bearings, and IGBT chips from European countries will begin to be restricted. So we hope, since wind power is a highly globalized industry, we hope Chinese wind power industry can have much more stronger international cooperation with other countries and other parts of the world to build a stronger supply chain for the whole industry, especially for the supply chains for offshore wind, because some part of the offshore wind components is supplied from the international supply chains. And after the COVID-19, I have heard that many countries and communities issuing or announcing economic recovery stimulus package. China is as well, and the government and the industry and some institutions and the research institutions, including universities, are just arguing and discussing our stimulus package. And we are trying to put the package to lay emphasis on clean energy, including wind power and PV industry. So we will see a much more flexible capital inflows for the industry. And also we see a new story just happened here. Maybe you have already noticed that the Chinese wind and other renewable energies will receive new targets. Because at the general debate of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly last month, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced that China aims to have the emissions peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. We have 1 we have 10 years more than the European target. But on the basis of a Chinese situation and the Chinese energy structure, we have much way to go. We have much more burden. So it means huge development potentials for wind power to support a clean energy consumption by 2030 and 2060. That means for every year, we need at least 10 gigawatt annual installation for wind and solar. So 50 gigawatts annual installation for wind. 100 gigawatts for wind and solar. Because if we want to get the carbon neutrality by 2060, that means in the following 40 years, we have to reach the target of the electricity. All electricity comes from clean energy, including mainly from renewables. So for wind, at least 1/3 electricity comes from wind, and 1/3 from PV, solar PV electricity, and 1/3 from other like biomass or nuclear, other things. So we have to have the pure, clean electricity. That means, so that's really a burden for China, and but it's a bright side and a very ambitious target for Chinese wind power. So it's also the first time for Chinese government issues a very clear timetable for the target of carbon neutrality. So we will see this will translated into our wind power and solar PV power's new targets, and will influence our first 5-year plans planning. So as everybody knows, our 14th 5-year plan is just formulating and will issue next year. So that will be a great influence on this. And that's all what I want to share with you all. And thank you, Stephen. I'm happy to have your questions.
Well, you see me now just, wow, that is kind of overwhelming message, of course, what you say that first, congratulations that you obviously managed in China to overcome the COVID-19 crisis with the, sounds like a new record of new installations in 2020, but also the climate neutrality, of course, translated then into annual installations. You were talking about 100 gigawatt of annual solar and wind combined, which I think is impressive, and that's of course great news. So from my side, that is answering the questions. It rather gives us food for thought what that means for the rest of the world, because certainly other countries will be impressed and will also then have to take similar targets and steps.